Sterling Blackwood sat behind his sprawling mahogany desk, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the large bay window that overlooked the manicured lawns of his Greenwich, Connecticut estate. His hands, usually decisive and commanding, rested limply on the supple leather of his armchair, his mind a turbulent sea, far from the tranquil luxury surrounding him. His son, Landon Vance, was the storm at the center of his thoughts, a perpetual source of profound frustration. Landon had been handed the world on a silver platter, a legacy of immense privilege, an Ivy League education that was more a birthright than an achievement, and access to a seemingly bottomless well of wealth. And yet he had meticulously squandered every advantage on a hollow existence fueled by champagne-soaked parties, a revolving door of European sports cars, and a string of superficial flings that were as meaningless as they were expensive. Sterling sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to be pulled from the very depths of his soul. His eyes drifted to the stately family portrait hanging on the wall, a relic from a simpler time. There was Landon, a boy with a genuine, unforced smile plastered on his face. Where had that bright-eyed boy gone? Now all Sterling saw was a man-child who possessed no concept of hard work or personal responsibility, a man who moved through the world with the unshakable belief that it owed him everything simply for bearing the family name. The heavy office door creaked open, and Winston, his impeccably dressed butler, entered with the silent grace of a shadow. "Sir, your son has returned from his trip." "Send him in," Sterling replied, his voice a low, stern command, but controlled, betraying none of the tempest raging within him. Landon sauntered in, cloaked in his usual air of bored indifference. His tailored suit was flawless, his hair artfully disheveled, and the scent of a cologne that cost more than a month's rent only served to grate on Sterling's already frayed nerves. It was as if Landon existed in a hermetically sealed bubble of excess and ego, completely insulated from the grit and consequence of the real world. "Dad," Landon said casually, leaning against the doorframe with an infuriating nonchalance. "What's the big deal this time you called me back from St. Bart's for something urgent?" Sterling's eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. "Sit down, Landon." Landon rolled his eyes with theatrical boredom, but complied, sinking with a lazy grace into the plush chair opposite his father. "So what is it?" Sterling's tone remained glacial. "I am done watching you throw your life away." Landon raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Throw my life away? Last time I checked, I was living just fine." Sterling's legendary patience was wearing dangerously thin. "Living fine," he repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm. "You call spending millions on pointless luxuries and treating people like they beneath you a living fine?" Landon shrugged, a gesture of complete apathy. "What can I say? I'm enjoying myself." Sterling's jaw clenched so tightly a muscle pulsed in his cheek. He had been steeling himself for this confrontation for months, but even now the execution felt more difficult than he had imagined. "You're going to change," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for negotiation. "I've let this go on long enough, but it stops today." Landon crossed his arms, a smirk of amusement playing on his lips. "And how do you plan on doing that?" Sterling leaned forward, his presence filling the space between them, his expression hardening into a mask of grim determination. "You're going to get married." The room fell into a sudden, profound silence. Landon blinked, his brain seemingly struggling to process the words as if they were in a foreign language. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Sterling continued, his voice as steady and unyielding as granite. "You're going to marry Clara Mae." "Clara Mae?" Landon burst out laughing, a sharp, incredulous sound that bounced off the wood-paneled walls. He shook his head in disbelief. "Clara Mae, the waitress from that diner? You've lost it, Dad." Sterling didn't flinch, his resolve unshaken. "She's a hard-working, decent woman. She's everything you're not. and you need someone like her in your life to teach you what matters." Landon stared at his father, his amusement curdling into genuine shock, as if seeing a madman for the first time. "You expect me to marry some random girl I know and a waitress no less?" Sterling's voice was cold, sharp, and decisive as a surgeon's scalpel. "Yes, you will marry her, and if you don't, you'll lose everything, the estate, the money, your inheritance, it's all gone. You'll be cut off." Landon shot up from his chair, his face flushing a deep, mottled red with a potent cocktail of anger and astonishment. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I am," Sterling said, rising to his full height, towering over his son like a monument of paternal authority. "This is your last chance, Landon. I've watched you waste away long enough. Either you marry Clara Mae, or you'll be out on your own for the first time in your life." Landon paced the length of the opulent room, running his hands frantically through his perfect hair, his mind reeling as he tried to absorb the sheer absurdity of his father's ultimatum. The idea was preposterous, a relic from a bygone era. Marry a waitress? A woman who inhabited a universe so completely alien to his own? He couldn't wrap his head around his father's seriousness. Sterling's voice, now calm and cutting, sliced through his chaotic thoughts. "You have 1 week to decide, but let me make it clear, Landon, there's no going back. If you refuse, I'll make sure you don't have a penny to your name." Landon glared at his father, his eyes a battleground of disbelief and simmering rage. This wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. His father was dead serious. "What makes you think she'll even agree to this insane idea?" Landon asked, grasping for some semblance of control over the spiraling situation. Sterling allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. "She already has." Landon's mind raced, a frantic scramble of confusion and suspicion. How could this have been orchestrated behind his back? And why on earth would Clara Mae, of all people, agree to such a bizarre arrangement? This had to be another one of his father's elaborate power plays, a strategic move designed to cage him. "Think about it, Landon," Sterling said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly for the first time. "This could be the best thing that ever happened to you." Landon didn't respond. He couldn't. The crushing weight of the ultimatum his father had just delivered hung heavy and suffocating in the air. And for the very first time in his privileged, consequence-free life, he didn't have a clever, easy answer. The day of the wedding arrived with the grim speed of an execution. Landon stood before the full-length mirror in his bedroom, fumbling with the black tie of his bespoke suit. Despite his ingrained confidence in his own appearance, today felt different, alien. The reflection staring back at him was not the Landon Vance he knew, the man who was always in control, the master of his own universe, who never allowed anyone to dictate the terms of his life. Today he was merely a pawn, a well-dressed puppet in his father's grand manipulative play. Downstairs, the Greenwich estate had been transformed into a venue fit for a royal wedding, a breathtaking display of wealth and taste. But the atmosphere was thick with tension, not joy. Sterling had spared no expense, a fact that only highlighted the transactional nature of the event. This wasn't a marriage built on love or even mutual affection. It was a business deal, one where the primary asset at stake was his son's future. Clara Mae, on the other hand, sat in a small, quiet room at the back of the sprawling house. She stared down at the simple bouquet of wildflowers clutched in her lap, her fingers trembling slightly. She still couldn't quite believe she had gone through with this, marrying a man like Landon Vance, who so clearly despised the very idea of her. But Clara Mae wasn't in this for love, not initially. Her motivations were rooted in something far more desperate, a need that led directly back to her mother, Carol, whose health was in a precarious and rapid decline. This marriage, this gilded cage, meant financial security for her family. The door creaked open, and her mother appeared, leaning heavily on her cane. Her eyes, soft and kind, were filled with a mixture of love and deep-seated worry. "Are you sure about this, mija?" Clara Mae managed a small, unconvincing smile. "It's the only way, Mama, this will take care of you. You don't have to worry about anything anymore." Her mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "But what about you, Maggie? What about your happiness?" Clara Mae's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly composed herself. "I'll be fine. This is just a step. I'll handle it." Before Carol could protest further, a sharp knock came at the door. One of Sterling's assistants entered, informing Clara Mae that it was time. She took a deep, steadying breath, stood, and adjusted the simple, elegant white dress she wore. It wasn't extravagant, but it suited her. She wasn't here to play the part of a princess in a fairy tale. The ceremony itself was brutally quick, just as Landon had demanded. Standing at the altar, he barely cast a glance in Clara Mae's direction as she walked down the aisle, his expression a mask of cold, distant indifference. He hadn't bothered with a single word of small talk during the planning stages. Sterling's people had handled everything. To him, this was a business transaction, and nothing more. As they exchanged vows, Clara Mae's voice was steady, but Landon's was tinged with a raw irritation, as if he were reading the warranty for a faulty appliance. When the priest clad them husband and wife, Landon leaned in for the obligatory kiss, his lips barely brushing hers before he pulled back with an almost violent swiftness. The guests, mostly Sterling's close business associates, clapped politely, but the lack of warmth in the room was a palpable, chilling thing. Later, at the reception, Landon found himself exiled at the head table, nursing a glass of champagne, while Clara Mae mingled quietly with a few of the guests who dared to approach her. She looked utterly out of place amongst the high society vultures Landon was accustomed to. In fact, every single thing about this situation felt wrong, like a scene from a surrealist nightmare. He watched her from a distance, noting how she studiously avoided his gaze and kept to herself. As the night dragged on, a slow, burning fuse of impatience ignited within him. He had been strong-armed into this charade, and now he was expected to endure a reception where everyone pretended this union was a joyous occasion. It was all too much. Without a word, he stood and strode out of the room, escaping to the cool, dark sanctuary of the garden. He needed air, space, a moment to think. The quiet hum of the night was a blessed relief from the forced cheer inside. He took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the wreckage his life had become. He had always been the one in control, the one who lived by his own rules. Now, here he was, shackled to a woman he didn't love, all under the threat of total financial ruin. Moments later, he heard soft footsteps on the gravel path behind him. Clara Mae had followed him out. Her gentle voice broke the silence. "Landon, can we talk?" Landon didn't turn around at first. He didn't want to deal with this, not now, but he knew it was unavoidable. What is there to talk about, Clara Mae? This is what it is, we both know that. Clara Mae's face was calm in the moonlight, though a deep sadness swam in her eyes. "I know this isn't what either of us wanted," she began carefully. "But we're in it now. Maybe we can find a way to make it work." Landon finally turned to face her, his expression hard as stone. "Make it work? You think this can work? Look, I don't care what my father promised you, but I'm not interested in pretending this is something it's not." Clara Mae held her ground, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not asking for much, Landon, but I won't live like this with us at each other's throats." Landon's jaw tightened, frustration bubbling up like acid in his throat. "I never asked for this. I didn't want this." "I didn't either," Clara Mae replied softly. "But we both made our choices." Landon exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture of weary defeat. "Fine," he muttered, "but don't expect me to change overnight." "I'm not asking you to change overnight," Clara Mae said quietly. "I'm just asking for a little respect we can at least try." Landon's eyes flickered with something unreadable, perhaps a flicker of guilt, perhaps a hint of resignation. He didn't respond, just gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod before turning and walking back toward the house. Clara Mae stood there for a long moment, watching him go, the cool night air wrapping around her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was only the beginning of a very long, very complicated journey. The honeymoon phase that most newlyweds experience was utterly non-existent for Landon and Clara Mae. From the very beginning, their marriage was a Cold War, a state of armed neutrality. For Landon, it was a prison sentence he had reluctantly agreed to serve. For Clara Mae, it was a necessary evil, a means to an end she had accepted for her mother's sake. But as the days bled into weeks, the palpable tension between them only intensified. Landon was a ghost in his own home. When he wasn't attending some lavish social event or exclusive party, he was barricaded in his study, avoiding Clara Mae as if she were a contagion. Their interactions were brief, clipped, and always laced with a bitter undercurrent of resentment. Clara Mae tried, in her quiet way, to bridge the chasm between them, but every tentative outreach was met with a wall of indifference, or worse, outright hostility. One morning, Landon stumbled home in the pre-dawn light after a long night out, his shirt untucked and his eyes bloodshot from an excess of everything. Clara Mae was already in the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast for herself. She glanced up as he entered, but said nothing. The silence between them had become their primary language. Landon grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and leaned against the counter, watching her for a moment with a detached curiosity. "You're up early?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. Clara Mae looked at him, her disappointment a carefully guarded secret behind a neutral mask. "I have work," she replied, her tone flat. He nodded, his attention already elsewhere. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and within seconds he was lost in a world of texts and notifications, completely oblivious to her presence. Clara Mae sighed quietly and turned back to the stove, flipping the eggs in the pan. His behavior no longer surprised her, but the sting of it remained. She had held on to a sliver of hope that, over time, they might find some common ground, but it was becoming painfully clear that Landon had no intention of making any effort whatsoever. That night, as Clara Mae sat on the living room couch trying to lose herself in a book, Landon breezed in from yet another night on the town. This time, she couldn't contain her frustration. "Do you ever plan on being for more than 5 minutes?" Clara Mae asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Landon, halfway through unbuttoning his shirt, paused and looked at her, his eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Clara Mae said, setting her book down with a firm thud, "that you've barely been here since we got married. I thought maybe we could at least try to act like a married couple." Landon scoffed, a sound of pure derision. "Married couple, Clara Mae? This isn't a real marriage, you know that, as well as I do." Clara Mae stood up, her patience finally snapping. "I get that this wasn't your choice, Landon, but it wasn't mine either. We're stuck in this together, whether we like it or not. The least you could do is try to make it a little less unbearable." Landon shook his head, clearly not in the mood for what he considered emotional drama. "Look, I didn't sign up for this emotional stuff, okay? You want respect? Fine, I'll respect you, but don't expect me to change my life for something that was forced on me." Clara Mae felt a surge of hot anger rise in her chest. She had tried to be patient, to give him the space he so clearly craved, but it was obvious that Landon was only interested in preserving his carefree bachelor lifestyle. "I'm not asking you to change overnight," she said, her voice low but firm. "I'm asking you to at least acknowledge that this affects more than just you." Landon's expression softened for a fleeting moment, a brief crack in his armor, but then he shrugged, brushing her words aside as if they were dust. "I'll do what I can, but don't expect miracles." With that, he walked past her and disappeared into his room, leaving Clara Mae standing alone in the vast, silent living room, her frustration simmering into a slow, painful burn. The days continued in this frustrating pattern, Landon living his life as if he were still single, and Clara Mae trying to navigate her role in this strange, cold marriage. She threw herself into her work at the corner bistro, using the long, demanding hours as an escape from the suffocating tension at home. At least there, she felt a sense of purpose, a small measure of control. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, she returned to the Greenwich estate to find Landon sitting on the couch, aimlessly flipping through television channels. It was a rare sighting, like a comet. For a moment, she considered retreating to her room to avoid another stilted, awkward interaction, but something compelled her to sit down in the armchair across from him. "You look tired," Landon remarked, his eyes still glued to the screen. Clara Mae let out a small, humorless laugh. "That's what happens when you actually work for a living." Landon frowned, but said nothing. A beat of silence passed between them, heavier and more charged than usual. Clara Mae decided to break it. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if things were different, if we hadn't ended up like this?" Landon finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable, a placid surface over unknown depths. "I don't know. I never really thought about it." Clara Mae nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were twisting in her lap. "I guess I've been thinking about it a lot lately, what this could have been if we both weren't so against it from the start." Landon stared at her for a long, heavy moment before standing up abruptly. "Look, Clara Mae, I get that you're trying okay, but I'm not ready for whatever it is you want from us." Clara Mae looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a heartbreaking mix of sadness and resignation. "I don't want anything from you, Landon. I just thought maybe things could be different." Landon didn't respond. He simply walked away, leaving Clara Mae once again feeling as though she were grasping at smoke, at something that was never truly there. As the door to his room clicked shut, she sighed and leaned back against the couch, the crushing realization dawning on her that the road ahead was going to be even longer and more arduous than she had ever imagined. Days morphed into weeks, and the icy expanse between Landon and Clara Mae remained vast and unforgiving. But something within Landon had begun to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. It wasn't a sudden epiphany about the marriage or a newfound affection for Clara Mae, not yet. It was a growing, gnawing discomfort, a creeping suspicion that perhaps his father had been right about one thing. His life lacked any real direction, and that emptiness bothered him more than he was willing to admit. One evening, returning from another aimless, expensive outing with his so-called friends, Landon found himself inexplicably pausing in front of the corner bistro, the diner where Clara Mae worked. He had never given her job much thought, viewing it as just another mundane detail of a life that was entirely foreign to him. But now, standing there on the sidewalk, a flicker of curiosity ignited within him. What was her world like when he wasn't around? What kind of universe did she inhabit? Acting on an impulse he didn't fully understand, he stepped inside, immediately feeling out of place amidst the modest decor and the low, comfortable hum of conversation. The air smelled of home-cooked food, a stark, comforting contrast to the sterile, high-end restaurants he frequented. His gaze swept the room until he spotted her at the far end, taking an order from an elderly couple seated by the window. She hadn't seen him yet. Landon stood there for a moment, feeling a wave of awkwardness wash over him. This was impulsive, and now he felt like an intruder. Before he could retreat, Clara Mae glanced up, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw him. "Landon," she asked, walking over to him, a question in her voice. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged, attempting a casual air that he didn't feel. "I was in the neighborhood." Clara Mae raised an eyebrow, her skepticism clear. "In the neighborhood at my job?" Landon cleared his throat, feeling strangely exposed under her steady gaze. "Yeah, well, I figured I'd see what this place was like." Clara Mae studied him for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Okay, do you want to sit down? I can get you something. I can. He hesitated, then nodded. Sure, whatever you think is good. She motioned to a small, empty table near the counter. Take a seat, I'll bring you something. As Landon sat, he felt a profound sense of displacement. The clientele here was not his crowd. People were dressed in jeans and work shirts, some looking like they had just finished a long day of physical labor. There was a raw simplicity to the place, an authenticity that made Landon feel like an imposter. Clara Mae returned a few minutes later with a heavy plate and set it in front of him. Here you go, our special for the night. Landon looked down. It was nothing fancy, just a hearty portion of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. But the aroma was genuinely inviting. For the first time in a long, long time, he felt a flicker of interest in something other than the usual parade of excess that defined his life. He picked up his fork and took a bite. To his astonishment, it was good. Really good. He glanced up at Clara Mae, who was watching him with a hint of amusement. Not bad, right? She asked, folding her arms across her chest. Landon nodded, swallowing another mouthful. Yeah, it's better than I expected. Clara Mae chuckled softly. It's not all caviar and champagne, but it gets the job done. He looked at her, sensing for the first time the quiet, resilient strength behind her words. You've been working here a long time, huh? Yeah, Clara Mae said, her expression softening. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, it pays the bills, and I get to meet all kinds of people. Landon nodded, still chewing thoughtfully. For the first time, he was getting a glimpse into Clara Mae's world, a world so fundamentally different from his own, yet somehow more real. It was a world built on effort, on people showing up day after day and doing what needed to be done. A concept Landon had never truly grasped until this very moment. As Clara Mae returned to her duties, Landon continued eating, lost in thought. He had always equated luxury with success, but now, sitting in this humble diner, he wasn't so sure. These people didn't have immense wealth or power, but they seemed content. They weren't desperately chasing the next thrill or drowning themselves in excess. They were just living, working, and finding meaning in the small, everyday things. After finishing his meal, Landon stood and walked over to Clara Mae, who was clearing a nearby table. Thanks for the food, he said, handing her some cash to cover the bill. Clara Mae took the money, a small, tired smile gracing her lips. You're welcome. Landon hesitated, then added, I'll see you at home. She nodded, but said nothing more, watching as he walked out of the restaurant and into the night. Back at the estate, Landon found himself unable to sleep. He lay awake, his mind replaying the scene at the diner, thinking about Clara Mae, about his own empty life. For so long he had believed that money and status were the ultimate measures of a man. But now, for the first time, he wondered if there was more to life, something he had been missing all along. The next morning, Landon did something he had never done before. Instead of sleeping until noon or heading out for another meaningless social engagement, he decided to join Clara Mae for breakfast. When she came downstairs, she was visibly surprised to find him sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee already in his hand. You're up early, she remarked, one eyebrow raised in question. Landon shrugged. Figured I'd try something different. Clara Mae didn't respond immediately, but she nodded as she sat down across from him. A strange, tentative peace settled between them. It wasn't a breakthrough, not yet, but it was something, a subtle shift that neither of them could quite articulate. As they sat in the quiet of the morning, Landon realized that maybe, just maybe, his father's insane plan wasn't quite as absurd as he had initially thought. Maybe, despite everything, this forced marriage, this unexpected life, could offer him something he hadn't even known he was searching for. Landon Vance had never, in his wildest dreams, imagined himself working in a place like the Corner Bistro. It was a concept so far beneath him that he had always scoffed at the very idea. But after that fateful night when he visited Clara Mae at work, something inside him had fractured and begun to reset. He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but a new, unfamiliar need was taking root within him, a need to prove, mostly to himself, that he wasn't the shallow, entitled man everyone, including himself, believed him to be. So, in a move that was completely uncharacteristic, Landon made a decision. He would work at the restaurant. When he first proposed the idea to Clara Mae, her shock was palpable. "You at the restaurant?" she asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Yeah," he said, a defensive edge to his voice. "What's so surprising about that?" Clara Mae blinked, trying to mask her skepticism. "I don't know, Landon. You've never worked a day in your life. This is unexpected." "I can do it," he insisted, though his voice wavered slightly, betraying a flicker of his own uncertainty. Clara Mae didn't argue. She simply shrugged. "All right, just don't expect it to be easy." The next day, Landon walked into the diner feeling a volatile mix of grim determination and profound discomfort. He was an alien in this environment. The noise, the constant, chaotic movement, the smell of food sizzling on the grill. It was an assault on his senses. He felt absurdly out of place in his crisply pressed shirt, which quickly began to cling to him in the oppressive heat of the kitchen. Clara Mae introduced him to the other staff, most of whom eyed him with a thinly veiled suspicion that bordered on contempt. After all, Landon Vance's reputation preceded him, and it wasn't a flattering one. To them, he was just another spoiled rich kid slumming it for a thrill. But Clara Mae had vouched for him, and that was enough for them to give him a chance, albeit a skeptical one. His first task was deceptively simple: bussing tables. But even that proved to be more challenging than he'd anticipated. He struggled to keep up with the relentless pace, plates clattering precariously as he hurried to clear tables for new customers. His hands, accustomed to holding champagne flutes, fumbled as he tried to balance stacks of dirty dishes. By midday, he was drenched in sweat and utterly overwhelmed. Clara Mae watched him from a distance, half expecting him to throw in the towel and storm out. But to her surprise, he didn't. Despite his obvious misery, Landon pushed through, his jaw set in a stubborn line, refusing to quit. There was a grit in him that she had never seen before. At the end of his first day, Landon collapsed into a chair in the back room, every muscle screaming in protest. His legs ached, his hands were raw, and he had a newfound, painful appreciation for just how hard Clara Mae's job really was. "You survived," she said, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips as she handed him a bottle of water. Landon chuckled weakly, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Barely." "You'll get used to it," Clara Mae assured him. "It's just your first day." Landon took a deep breath, nodding. "I didn't realize it was this hard." Clara Mae sat down beside him. "A lot of people don't. They think jobs like this are easy, but it's tough work. It's not glamorous, but it's honest." For a moment, a comfortable silence settled between them. Landon looked at her, really looked at her, and realized the immense strength it took for her to do this every single day. She wasn't just a waitress. She was resilient, determined, and far more capable than he had ever given her credit for. The next few weeks followed a similar grueling pattern. Landon continued to work at the restaurant, slowly, painfully, getting the hang of things. He learned how to carry 3 plates at once without dropping them, how to navigate the fast-paced, high-pressure environment, and most importantly, how to function as part of a team. The other staff members who had initially been so skeptical began to warm up to him as they witnessed his genuine effort. It wasn't easy. There were days when he wanted to quit, days when the sheer physical exhaustion overwhelmed him, and he wondered if any of this was worth it. But something kept him going. Maybe it was the small, unfamiliar flicker of pride he felt at the end of each shift, knowing he had accomplished something real. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the way Clara Mae looked at him now, not with pity or resentment, but with a quiet, growing respect. One afternoon, as they were closing up the restaurant, Clara Mae turned to him and said, "You're doing better than I thought you would." Landon raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment?" Clara Mae smiled. "It's an observation." He laughed, a real unforced laugh, shaking his head. "I'll take it." They worked in companionable silence for a few moments before Landon spoke again, his tone more serious. "Clara Mae, He paused, unsure how to articulate the complex emotions churning inside him. "I didn't think I'd ever be in a place like this, but I get it now. What you do, what everyone here does, it's real work, and it matters." Clara Mae looked at him, surprised by his raw honesty. "It's not about the money or the status," she said softly. "It's about earning something for yourself, something you can be proud of." Landon nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Yeah, I'm starting to see that." For the first time in his life, Landon was beginning to understand the value of hard work, the deep, satisfying sense of accomplishment that came from putting in a real effort, from contributing to something larger than his own selfish desires. And with that understanding came a profound, deepening respect for Clara Mae, for the life she had built for herself, for the quiet dignity with which she faced her challenges. As the days passed, his transformation became more evident. He was no longer just going through the motions. He was fully engaged, taking pride in doing his job well. And though the paycheck was a pittance compared to what he was used to, the sense of accomplishment felt infinitely more rewarding. In the quiet moments when he and Clara Mae were alone, a subtle but significant shift occurred in their relationship. They were no longer just two strangers trapped in a forced marriage. They were slowly, tentatively, becoming partners, working towards something they couldn't yet define, but something that felt undeniably real. Landon had never thought contentment could be found in the mundane routine of his new life, yet here he was, a few months into working at the corner bistro, and something fundamental inside him had shifted. It wasn't just the physical labor, which had become more manageable over time. It was something deeper, a feeling he had never expected. Pride. For the first time, he felt he was contributing to something tangible, something meaningful. And with this seismic shift in his outlook came another, even more startling realization. Clara Mae was at the center of it all. At first, his feelings for her had been a tangled mess of confusion, frustration, and resentment. But now something new was blossoming in that barren soil. He found himself thinking about her more often, noticing the quiet grace with which she moved through her day, the resilient strength that radiated from her. She didn't need him, and that, paradoxically, made her all the more intriguing. Unlike the women from his past, who were invariably drawn to his wealth and status, Clara Mae had never asked for anything. She was fiercely independent, self-sufficient, and utterly focused on what truly mattered to her, taking care of her family and working hard. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table, sharing a simple meal, Landon found himself watching her intently. She was talking about her day at the diner. Nothing extraordinary, just the usual anecdotes about difficult customers and small kitchen triumphs. But he was completely captivated. There was something in the way she spoke, the way her eyes lit up when she recounted a funny moment, that made him see her in a completely new light. "You're staring?" Clara Mae said, glancing at him with a raised eyebrow. Landon blinked, caught off guard. "Sorry, I was just thinking." Clara Mae smiled, a teasing glint in her eyes. "Thinking about what? How you're going to beat me at cleaning tables tomorrow?" Landon chuckled, shaking his head. "No, I was just thinking about us." The smile faded from Clara Mae's face, replaced by a more serious, guarded expression. "What about us?" Landon hesitated, struggling to find the right words to articulate the unfamiliar emotions swirling within him. "I mean, I know this marriage wasn't what either of us wanted, but it's starting to feel different, at least for me." Clara Mae set her fork down and leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "Different how?" Landon swallowed, feeling a nervousness he had never experienced before. He had always been so effortlessly confident around women, but with Clara Mae, it was different. "I guess I'm starting to care about you about this." Clara Mae's eyes softened, but a hint of caution remained in her gaze. "Landon, She paused, choosing her words with deliberate care. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. We've both changed. I can see that, but this isn't easy for me." "I know," Landon said quickly. "I'm not expecting you to feel the same way right now. I just wanted to be honest with you. I've been a different person lately, and I think it's because of you." Clara Mae let out a slow, measured breath, her gaze drifting down to her hands. "It's complicated." "I get that," Landon replied. "I know I've got a lot to make up for, but I want to try Clara Mae. I really do." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with the weight of unspoken feelings and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Finally, Clara Mae looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Trying is a good start," she said quietly. "But it's going to take more than words, Landon." He nodded, a sense of quiet resolve settling in his chest. "I'm not going anywhere." As the days went on, Landon made a conscious effort to connect with her. He took on more responsibilities at the restaurant, learning everything from washing dishes to managing the front of house during the chaotic dinner rush. The work was exhausting, but it was rewarding in a way he had never known. Clara Mae, for her part, began to notice the profound changes in him. He was less arrogant, more willing to listen, and most importantly, he was starting to show genuine empathy for the people around him. There were moments when she found herself watching him, the way he used to watch her, wondering when exactly this incredible transformation had occurred. But even as her own feelings for him began to evolve, she remained guarded. She had learned the hard way not to let her defenses down too easily, and with Landon, there was still so much unresolved history between them. One evening, as they closed the restaurant together, Clara Mae turned to him with a question that had been weighing on her mind for days. "Why now?" Landon frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "Why are you changing now?" she asked, leaning against the counter. "Why did it take all of this for you to start caring?" Landon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I was scared of losing everything, scared of being vulnerable. But now I think I'm starting to realize that what I was afraid of wasn't worth holding on to." Clara Mae nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I'm still figuring things out, too. Landon, this wasn't how I imagined my life would turn out, and I don't know where we go from here, but I'm not against seeing where this leads." Landon smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I can ask for." From that moment on, something shifted between them. It wasn't a dramatic overnight change, but a subtle warmth began to thaw the ice that had existed for so long. They worked side by side at the restaurant, shared quiet meals at home, and began to build something that felt real, even if neither of them could fully define it yet. For Landon, the growing affection he felt for Clara Mae was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had never cared for anyone the way he was starting to care for her, and the dawning realization that he might actually be in love with her hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in his life, Landon Vance was ready and willing to find out. As the days passed, Clara Mae found herself grappling with a secret she had kept buried for far too long. Every day she spent with Landon, every shared moment, chipped away at the walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart. But deep down, she knew there was something he didn't know, a truth that had the power to shatter everything between them. The guilt was a heavy, constant weight, especially as she watched him transform before her very eyes. He was no longer the arrogant, spoiled man she had married. He was kind, thoughtful, and genuinely invested in building something real with her. But that only made her burden harder to bear. How could she continue to build a relationship on a foundation of lies, knowing that her initial intentions had been rooted in revenge? Late one night, after they had closed the restaurant and were sitting together on the couch, the pressure of her secret became unbearable. Landon was talking animatedly about their future, how they could expand the diner, how they might take a trip together, and all she could think about was the lie she was living. "Landon," she interrupted softly, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I need to tell you." He looked at her, his expression one of calm curiosity. "What is it?" Clara Mae's heart hammered against her ribs. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but now that it was here, the words felt like shards of glass lodged in her throat. She took a deep, shaky breath, her hands twisting together in her lap. "There's something about me that you don't know," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Something that I've kept from you from the beginning." Landon frowned, sensing the gravity in her tone. "Clara Mae, what are you talking about?" Clara Mae looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "I didn't marry you just because of the money. It wasn't just about taking care of my mom." Landon's confusion deepened. "Then why did you marry me?" She hesitated, her stomach churning with a nauseous blend of fear and shame. "I married you because I wanted revenge." Landon froze, his eyes widening in stunned disbelief. "Revenge? What are you talking about?" Clara Mae's voice shook as the truth, so long suppressed, finally came tumbling out. "Your father, Sterling, he ruined my family years ago. He was involved in a business deal that destroyed my father. We lost everything because of him, my dad. He couldn't handle it. He fell into a deep depression, and eventually he took his own life." Landon stared at her, his face ashen, his expression completely unreadable. "Clara Mae." "I didn't know." Tears welled up in Clara Mae's eyes, but she forced herself to continue, to purge the poison from her system. "When I found out who you were, I saw an opportunity. I thought that by marrying you, by getting close to your family, I could somehow make Sterling pay for what he did to us. I thought it would bring me closure." The silence that fell between them was deafening, thick with betrayal and shattered trust. Landon's mind reeled, desperately trying to process the revelation. He had known Clara Mae was guarded, that she held parts of herself back, but this was something he never could have imagined. "So this whole time," Landon said slowly, his voice strained and tight, "you've been using me, using this marriage, to get back at my father?" Clara Mae shook her head quickly, her eyes pleading with him. "No, Landon. That was my plan at first, but things changed. You changed. I never expected to feel this way about you. I never thought you would become someone I could care about, but now I don't know what to do." Landon surged up from the couch, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "I can't believe this," he muttered, pacing back and forth across the expensive rug. "I thought we were building something real. Clara Mae, I thought—" "We are," Clara Mae cried, standing to face him. "I swear, Landon, what we have now is real. But I couldn't keep lying to you. You needed to know the truth." Landon stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing hurt. "How am I supposed to believe anything you say now you've been hiding this from me the whole time? How can I trust you?" Clara Mae's heart broke at the sight of his pain, knowing she was the cause of it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted it to end up like this." Landon stared at her for a long, tense moment, his jaw clenched tight. "I need to think," he said finally, his voice cold and distant. "I need space." Clara Mae nodded, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. "I understand." Without another word, Landon grabbed his jacket and walked out the door, leaving Clara Mae standing alone in the cavernous living room, her heart shattered into a million pieces. The next few days were the hardest of her life. Landon had barely spoken to her since the night of her confession. He would come home late, avoid her at the restaurant, and when they were forced to be in the same room, the tension was a suffocating physical presence. She knew she had to give him time, but every silent, passing moment felt like an eternity of torture. She had made her choice by telling him the truth, but now she was terrified she had lost him forever. Then one evening, as she sat alone at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea she didn't want, Landon came home. He looked exhausted, as if the weight of the world was finally crushing him. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Clara Mae nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Okay." Landon walked over and sat down across from her, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me about your father, about everything." Clara Mae held her breath, waiting for the verdict. "I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't hurt," he said slowly. "It does, but I also know that I'm not the same person I was when we first got married, and I don't think you are either." Clara Mae's eyes filled with tears again, but this time a tiny glimmer of hope flickered within them. "I don't know where we go from here," Landon admitted, his voice cracking with emotion. "But I'm willing to try if you are." Clara Mae nodded, unable to speak. She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers, and for the first time in days, she felt a small, fragile flicker of hope for their future. Landon's mind had been a maelstrom of turmoil ever since Clara Mae's confession. He spent hours replaying her words, trying to reconcile the woman he had grown to care for with the person who had entered his life with a heart full of revenge. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that their marriage, the one he had once resented but had slowly, painstakingly come to value, had been built on a foundation of deceit. In the days following her revelation, he couldn't bear to be around her. Every glance, every shared space, was a fresh reminder of the betrayal, a knot tightening in his chest. He had come to care for her deeply, perhaps even love her, but now everything was shrouded in uncertainty. What was real? What was a performance? He threw himself into his work at the restaurant, staying late, avoiding the vast empty silence of the Greenwich estate and the woman who now felt like a stranger. His nights were spent wandering the city aimlessly, revisiting the bars and clubs he used to frequent, hoping to find a distraction in the familiar chaos. But even those places felt different now, hollow, shallow, and deeply unsatisfying. The people he used to party with seemed like caricatures, their conversations devoid of substance. Landon had changed, whether he liked it or not, and now he felt like a man without a country, belonging neither to his old world nor his new one. One night, after a particularly long shift, he found himself walking down a quiet, tree-lined street, lost in thought. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. He wasn't in the mood for company, not even the mindless chatter of the friends who still clung to him, expecting the same carefree, arrogant man he had once been. He sank onto a small park bench, rubbing his face with his hands in a gesture of utter frustration. What was he supposed to do now? How could he forgive Clara Mae? And the more important, more painful question, did he even want to? As he sat there, enveloped by the quiet of the night, memories of the past few months flashed through his mind. The way Clara Mae had slowly softened toward him, the quiet, comfortable moments they had shared over simple meals, the way she had stood by him, a silent pillar of support as he stumbled through his first grueling weeks of work. For the first time, a new thought began to take shape. Maybe her feelings had changed too. Maybe, like him, she hadn't expected this transactional marriage to evolve into anything real. But somewhere along the way, against all odds, it had. The realization hit him with a surprising force. He couldn't deny the genuine connection they had built, no matter how it had started. And maybe, just maybe, Clara Mae had been telling the truth when she said that what they had now was real. But trust? Trust was a fragile, delicate thing, and once shattered, it was incredibly difficult to piece back together. Landon stood up from the bench, shoving his hands into his pockets as he began to walk again, his steps slow and deliberate. He needed time to figure out what this meant for them. But every time he contemplated cutting her out of his life for good, a sharp physical pain lanced through his chest. Could he really walk away from her after everything they had been through? By the time he arrived back at the estate, the house was dark and quiet, save for a dim, warm glow emanating from the kitchen. He hesitated in the doorway, knowing she was likely in there. Part of him, the old cowardly part, wanted to turn and leave, to avoid the confrontation for another day. But another part of him, a part that had been growing stronger and more resilient, knew that running away would solve nothing. When he stepped inside, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. She looked up when she heard him, her face pale and drawn. She had been waiting for him just as she had every night since her confession. "Hey," Landon said quietly, the single word heavy with all the things he didn't know how to say. Clara Mae nodded, her voice a soft echo. "Hey." The silence that followed was thick with a week's worth of unspoken tension. He didn't know where to begin. "I've been thinking," Landon began, sinking into the chair across from her, "about everything." Clara Mae's eyes met his, filled with a weary apprehension. Landon sighed, leaning back. "I don't know what to do with all of this, Clara Mae. I can't pretend that it doesn't hurt, that I don't feel betrayed, but I also don't want to lose what we've built." Clara Mae's hands tightened around her cup, her expression a mask of profound regret. "I know I hurt you, Landon, and I'll understand if you can't forgive me, but I swear to you things changed for me. This stopped being about revenge a long time ago." Landon looked away, his jaw clenched. "But how can I trust that? How can I be sure that you're not just saying what I want to hear?" Clara Mae's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't break down. Instead, she looked at him with a steady, unwavering gaze, her voice firm. "You can't not right away, but I'm willing to prove it to you every day if you'll give me the chance." Landon rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of her words. Trust would take time, but as he looked at her, sitting there so vulnerable, yet so determined, he realized he didn't want to walk away. He didn't want to lose her. "I'm not saying I'm ready to forgive everything," Landon said slowly, choosing his words with care, "but willing to try. I care about you, Clara Mae, more than I thought I would, and I don't want to throw that away." Clara Mae's breath hitched, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a glimmer of hope illuminated her tired eyes. "I care about you too, Landon, more than you know." The silence that followed wasn't as heavy as before. It was filled with the unspoken promise of a second chance, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. As Landon stood ready to head to bed, he paused and looked back at her. "We'll take it one day at a time, but we'll try." Clara Mae nodded, her voice soft but sure. One day at a time. The following weeks were a fragile, precarious dance, a series of tentative steps forward punctuated by painful reminders of the past. Landon and Clara Mae worked diligently to rebuild the shattered trust between them, but the ghost of her revelation hovered over them like a persistent shadow. He tried his best to move past the betrayal, but doubt, like a stubborn weed, still lingered in the back of his mind, especially in the quiet, lonely hours of the night. One day, Landon came home to find the house unnervingly empty. At first, he assumed Clara Mae was just out running errands, but as the hours ticked by, a gnawing, cold worry began to take root in his chest. He checked his phone for missed calls or messages. Nothing. The kitchen was untouched, and her coat wasn't on the hook by the door where she always left it. By late evening, his worry had metastasized into full-blown panic. He tried calling her again, but her phone went straight to voicemail. A sinking, dreadful feeling began to solidify in his gut. He called the corner bistro, but they hadn't seen her either. Clara Mae had vanished. Landon's heart hammered against his ribs as he paced the vast living room, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of questions. Where had she gone? Why would she leave without a word? Was this her way of escaping the tangled mess they had been trying to unravel? Hours bled into an agonizing night of waiting, and his anxiety grew with each passing silent minute. By morning, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. He needed help. Reluctantly, he dialed his father's number. Sterling answered on the second ring, his voice calm but tinged with concern. "Landon, it's early. What's going on?" "She's gone," Landon blurted out, unable to contain the raw panic in his voice. "Clara Mae's gone, and I don't know where she is." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Sterling spoke again, his tone shifting to one of serious concern. "Gone? What do you mean?" "I don't know," Landon exclaimed, pacing frantically as he tried to explain the situation. "She didn't leave a note, she hasn't called, and no one's seen her. I've been trying to reach her since yesterday, but her phone's off." Sterling sighed, the sound heavy through the phone. "This isn't like her, is it?" "No," Landon said, his voice tight with fear. "Not at all." There was another pause before Sterling responded. "I'll come over. We need to talk." Within the hour, Sterling was at the house. They sat across from each other in the living room, the tension between them a thick, palpable thing. Sterling had never been a man prone to displays of emotion, but there was a gravity to him now that Landon had rarely seen. "Are you sure this wasn't planned?" Sterling asked carefully. "Maybe she just needed space?" Landon shook his head vehemently. "No, we've been trying to work things out. It hasn't been easy, but we were getting there." Sterling leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "What do you think happened then?" "I don't know," Landon admitted, rubbing his temples in frustration. "But something doesn't feel right. She wouldn't just leave like this." Sterling studied his son for a long moment before speaking. "Do you think it has anything to do with what she told you about her father and me?" Landon's jaw clenched at the mention of it, but he knew his father had a point. Clara Mae's history with Sterling had been the catalyst for this whole ordeal. Could that history have resurfaced, causing her to flee? "I don't know," Landon said, his voice strained, "but we need to find her." Sterling nodded in agreement. "Then we start searching. I'll use my contacts. If she's still in the area, someone will know." The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls, aimless drives around town, and following up on dead-end leads. Sterling pulled every string he had, leveraging his extensive network of contacts to search for her. Landon was relentless, refusing to rest, driven by a desperate, gnawing fear. Every time his phone rang, his heart leapt into his throat, only to plummet back down when it wasn't her. The disappointment was a cumulative weight, pressing down on him, suffocating him. As the days stretched into a week with no sign of her, Landon began to lose hope. He found himself sitting in the silent house, staring at her empty chair, wondering if she was gone for good. Had he pushed her too far? Had the weight of their complicated past finally become too much for her to bear? It was Sterling who kept pushing, his determination unwavering. For all his faults, Sterling Blackwood was a man of action, and he refused to let Clara Mae simply disappear. Then, one evening, just as Landon was beginning to resign himself to the worst, Sterling's phone buzzed with a message. He read it, his eyes narrowing, before he looked up at his son. "We've got something," Sterling said, his voice steady but intense. "She's been seen in a small village outside of Burlington, Vermont." Landon's heart skipped a beat. "Burlington? What's she doing there?" "I don't know," Sterling replied. "But if she's there, we need to go." Without a second thought, Landon grabbed his coat and keys, his despair instantly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He wasn't going to waste another minute. Sterling followed, and together They left the house, united in their singular, desperate mission to bring Clara Mae back. The drive to Vermont was long and tense, every mile stretching into an eternity. Landon's mind raced, wondering what he would say when he saw her. What had driven her to leave? Was she safe? And the most terrifying question of all, would she even want to come back? By the time they arrived at the small, quiet village, night had fallen, casting long, deep shadows across the peaceful streets. They pulled up in front of a modest house, the one Sterling's contact had identified. Landon's heart pounded against his ribs as he stepped out of the car, the weight of the past week crashing down on him. This was it. He was about to see her again, and nothing would ever be the same. Landon stood outside the modest house, the cool Vermont evening air heavy with a palpable, electric anticipation. His heart raced, each beat a frantic drum against his ribs as he tried to steel himself for what was about to happen. He hadn't seen Clara Mae in over a week, and every single moment of her absence had been a special kind of hell, filled with unanswered questions and a gnawing, self-recriminating fear. Now, on the verge of seeing her again, he had no idea what to expect. Would she be angry? Would she push him away? Or worse, would she have decided that their fragile, nascent life together wasn't worth returning to? Sterling stood beside him, a silent, steady presence that was more comforting than Landon would ever admit out loud. This was something they had to face together, a mess of their own making. Colton took a deep, shuddering breath and knocked on the door. The sound seemed to echo through the preternaturally quiet street. For a moment, there was no response. Then the door creaked open just a few inches, revealing a familiar face, Clara Mae. She looked different. There was a softness to her, a quiet vulnerability that made Landon's heart ache with a fierce protective tenderness. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw him, and for a long, suspended moment, neither of them spoke. "Clara Mae," Landon said softly, his voice thick with a week's worth of unshed emotion. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if unsure whether to let him in. After what felt like an eternity, she finally stepped aside, allowing him and Sterling to enter. The house was small and simple, but it had a cozy, lived-in warmth that reminded Landon of the corner bistro. It was a world away from the cold opulence of Greenwich. Sterling, sensing the delicacy of the moment, remained near the door, giving them space. Landon and Clara Mae sat across from each other at a small kitchen table, a familiar setting that brought a flood of memories, of all the quiet dinners they had shared before everything had unraveled. Landon didn't waste any time. He had rehearsed 1,000 speeches during the long drive, but now that he was here, the words felt tangled and inadequate. He looked into her eyes, searching for the right place to begin. "Clara Mae," he started, his voice quiet but steady. "I've been going crazy since you left. I didn't know if you were okay, and I couldn't understand why you'd just disappear like that." Clara Mae's hands rested on the table, her fingers twisting together nervously. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Landon. I needed time to think." Landon nodded, a wave of understanding washing over him. "I get that. I know things have been complicated between us, and I know what I found out about your past. It changed everything. But I can't help but feel like we were building something real, and I don't want to lose that." Clara Mae's eyes flickered with a complex swirl of emotions, but she didn't speak. Instead, she looked down at her hands, her voice soft when she finally replied, "I didn't leave because I wanted to hurt you. I left because I needed to figure out who I was, outside of all the things that happened between our families. This wasn't just about you, Landon. It was about me. I've been carrying this anger for so long, and when I finally let it go, I did know who I was without it." Landon's heart ached as he listened. He had never considered how deeply her past had shaped her identity, how much of her had been consumed by that single-minded desire for revenge. "I understand," he said quietly. "But you don't have to go through this alone. We can figure it out together." Clara Mae met his eyes, her gaze searching his face, trying to determine if she could truly believe him. "Landon, I didn't just leave because of the past. I left because I was scared." "Scared of what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly. "Scared that I had fallen in love with you." Landon's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected it, not after everything. But there it was, the raw, unvarnished truth, hanging in the air between them, more powerful than all the hurt and betrayal they had endured. "Clara Mae," Landon began, his own voice thick with an emotion he could no longer deny. "I love you too." For the first time since their sham of a wedding, Landon felt as if every fractured piece of the puzzle was finally clicking into place. The immense weight of their past suddenly seemed manageable, a burden they could carry together. Everything they had been through, all the pain and confusion, had led them to this single, perfect moment. Clara Mae's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of profound relief. "I didn't think this was possible," she whispered. "Not after everything." Landon reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "It is possible we've been through hell, but we're still here, and I'm not giving up on us." Clara Mae let out a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around his. "I don't want to give up either. I want to try, Landon. I really do." In that moment, it was as if all the walls between them finally came crashing down. For the first time, Landon felt a sense of hope so pure and powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He didn't care how their story had begun. All that mattered was where they were now. Harvey, who had remained a silent observer throughout the conversation, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "I think it's time I said something." Landon and Clara Mae both turned to look at him, surprised. Sterling's face was somber, but there was a softness in his eyes that Landon had never seen before. "Clara Mae." "I owe you an apology," Sterling said, his voice low but sincere. "I was responsible for what happened to your family, and I can never undo that, but I want you to know that I'm deeply sorry. I've done a lot of things in my life that I regret, but hurting you and your family is one of the biggest." Clara Mae looked at him, her expression a conflict of old anger and new understanding. She had carried her hatred for this man for so long, but hearing his apology, she felt something inside her begin to release its tight, painful grip. It didn't erase the past, but it offered a sense of closure she hadn't realized she so desperately needed. "I appreciate your apology," Clara Mae said softly. "And I think it's time I let go of the past." Landon squeezed her hand, feeling the immense weight of those words. They had all been chained to the past for too long. Now, finally, it was time to move forward, together. The days following their return from Vermont were like the quiet, gentle calm after a long and violent storm. Landon and Clara Mae, having finally confronted their pasts and laid bare their truths, were now ready to build something real, something lasting. A quiet, unspoken understanding flowed between them, a current of mutual respect and affection that hadn't existed before. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but for the first time they were walking it side by side, unburdened by the weight of secrets and lies. Back at the Greenwich estate, life settled into a new, comfortable rhythm. Landon, no longer avoiding his responsibilities, threw himself fully into his work at the restaurant. Every morning they would walk together to the corner bistro, talking about their plans for the day. The shadow of their past struggles still lingered, but the connection between them had deepened, solidified. They were no longer two individuals forced together by circumstance. They were partners, allies in every sense of the word. One evening, after a long day at the restaurant, they sat together in their kitchen, the room filled with the comforting aroma of dinner cooking on the stove. Soft music played in the background, creating a peaceful atmosphere that neither of them had thought possible just a few months ago. Clara Mae looked across the table at Landon, her heart full of emotions she had once been too afraid to express. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought we'd end up here not like this." Landon smiled, a genuine, easy warmth in his eyes. "Neither did I, but I'm glad we did." They shared a moment of quiet contentment, the kind of comfortable silence that speaks volumes, where just the simple presence of each other is enough. As they ate, Landon hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's something I've been thinking about, something I want to do." Clara Mae set her fork down, her expression curious. "What is it?" Landon took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking about my dad, about everything that's happened between us, and, well, about the future." Clara Mae's eyes softened. She knew the relationship between Landon and Sterling had been a minefield of tension and resentment, but she had also witnessed the slow, tentative mending of their fractured bond. "What are you thinking?" she asked gently. Landon met her gaze, his expression serious. "I've decided to give away most of my inheritance." Clara Mae blinked in surprise, her eyebrows shooting up. "You're what?" "I've thought about it a lot," Landon continued, his voice steady and confident. "That money, it's caused nothing but problems. It's part of the reason I became the person I used to be, the person I don't want to be anymore. I don't want to live a life defined by wealth or power, and I definitely don't want it to come between us." Clara Mae stared at him, her heart swelling with an overwhelming mix of emotions. She had never, ever expected this from the Landon Vance she had first met. The man who had once lived a life of thoughtless extravagance was now willing to give it all away. It was a decision that spoke volumes about how profoundly he had changed. "But Landon," she said softly, "you don't have to do that. We've already changed so much, you don't have to give up everything." Landon smiled, a calm, self-assured confidence in his expression. "I know, but I want to. I've already talked to my dad about it. He's agreed to donate most of the money to charity and the rest is for us to start over. We don't need much, Clara Mae, just enough to live a good life without all the chaos that money brings." Clara Mae felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude and love for the man sitting across from her. She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I don't care about the money, Landon, I never did. All I care about is you." Landon squeezed her hand gently, his smile widening. "That's all I need to hear." The next few days were a flurry of preparations. Sterling, true to his word, had already initiated the process of distributing the family fortune to various charities and foundations, a move that both surprised and impressed Clara Mae. It seemed that even he had been transformed by the recent turmoil. One afternoon, as they sat in Sterling's office, he handed Landon the final documents. "It's done," he said simply. "The money's been transferred, and the remaining funds are in a new account for you and Clara Mae." Landon took the papers, a strange, profound sense of relief washing over him. It was as if a massive, invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He turned to Clara Mae, who smiled at him, her eyes shining with encouragement. "Thank you, Dad," Landon said, looking up at his father. He hadn't said it often, but today it felt right. Sterling nodded, his expression softening into one of genuine pride. "I'm proud of you, Landon. I know this wasn't easy, but you've shown me that you're capable of more than I ever gave you credit for." Landon's heart swelled with gratitude and a deep sense of closure. His relationship with his father wasn't perfect, but they were healing, and that was more than he could have ever asked for. Later that evening, back at their home, Landon and Clara Mae stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. It was a quiet, beautiful moment, a perfect symbol of the new beginning they had fought so hard to achieve. "We've come a long way," Landon said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Clara Mae leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "Yeah, we have." As they stood there, watching the world grow calm and quiet around them, Landon knew with an unshakable certainty that the future they were building together was one filled with hope, love, and endless possibility. They had endured pain, betrayal, and loss, but in the end, they had found something far more valuable than money or revenge. They had found each other, and that was enough.